I say grief coach and they go, oh, wow. You mean like death? Yeah, that's what I focus on.
In this episode, we speak with Jenny Jordan. Jenny is a grief support coach who helps people pick up the pieces after they've lost a loved one. In particular, she helps them move through what can be very confusing times, coupled with the feelings of sadness, guilt, or regret that may arise. Now, if you're watching this on video, I do apologise for my unexplained sudden appearance a few minutes in. That's what happens when I schedule things too close together. If you would like to support the show, or know more about us, or if you just want to make sure that you don't miss an episode, do sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com or click on the button on screen. Now get ready for this episode, The 4 Tasks of Grief.
When I was in junior high school, so 13, 14-ish, there's a cemetery that was about a half a dozen blocks from my house. And we used to sneak out at night and go and hang out there and scare each other and race around and all that kind of stuff. And I found it to be really peaceful and kind of creepy, so it was fun. And I grew up in Burbank, and they get a lot of fog. So it had that movie set quality of a lot of low-lying fog late at night, and the yellow street lights would shine down, and, it had this really eerie quality. So that was a lot of fun. My big introduction to death really was when my mother died. I was 22, she was 50, and she had a massive heart attack and died overnight. I was terribly unprepared. I felt as if God had grabbed me by the ankles and just shook me really, really hard and shook everything out of my pockets. There was no support. This was in 1989. There was no support. There were no grief groups. Nobody talked about any of this stuff. She had claimed that she didn't want a funeral. She had made arrangements to donate her body to USC Medical School. So that was already cared for. I felt like I had no choice. I had no voice in her death process. And afterwards, we had no service. It was like she had just evaporated. It was really weird. And that took me 5 years of wandering around aimlessly with my heart just broken and bleeding all over the place before I found a good therapist and figured out how to deal with all of this. That experience gave me the ability to face it and talk about it and not shy away from grief and death, because I had been sucker punched by it already, and I wasn't going to get sucker punched by it again.
You're a coach, and by the way, you're sharing this marvelous title because we are coaches as well. We don't use the term life coaches or life coaching because we hate this term. And we almost call ourselves, in our website, we call ourselves pre-death coaches or pre-death coaches, something like that. So you're a grief coach. So what does it mean?
When I say that I'm a grief coach, people go, oh. And they don't ask any follow-up questions, right? Because always say, oh, well, what does that mean? And what do you mean by life coach? And then you have to launch into this whole, like little spiel about what that means for you and what your particular niche is and all that stuff. I say grief coach and they go, oh, wow. You mean like death? Yeah, that's what I focus on. Well, how about divorce, or how about blah, blah, blah? And I say, well, yeah, divorce is definitely a loss, but death is a very specific experience. Right now, the clients that are coming to me are people who are dealing with old grief, residual grief. I have a client right now, his mom died a couple of years ago, and her ashes have been sitting in his closet, and he's trying to figure out how he's going to manage that. And, his family is pretty fractured, and he's feeling like he wants to place her ashes now. So he bought a plot for her, and he's working up to, figuring out how to deal with that. It's been a couple of years. Is that weird? Is anybody going to want to come? Does anybody even care anymore? Those kinds of things, and just how it's held him back. I've had many people say, I never dealt with it, or my family never talked about it, or whatever. And it's kind of nice because I'm not dealing with the rawness. When somebody dies, you spiral into that vortex of your world just stopping. It's like the giant record scratch, right? Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Already it's hard, for life coaches to talk about their profession and to actually have clients. Well, everybody will tell you, I don't want advice. This is not what I don't want anybody to tell me what to do, which, by the way, this is not what coaching is, And we need to explain, okay, this is not, we don't give any advice, we ask questions. So it's already difficult to talk about that. So I imagine for you how even more difficult it is to explain what you do, and how difficult maybe is to advertise yourself and get the clients over there. So how do you explain, you just mentioned, they say, wow, and then the conversation stops. So what happens next, basically?
That's the trick, because life coaches, find your purpose, live your passion, unblock, get unstuck, and it's all very high energy and very, live the life you've always wanted and all that kind of stuff.
We don't do that, by the way, Jenny. We don't do this shit, by the way. Sorry.
Then I come along going, let's talk about your person who died and how those feelings are making you stuck. So I find myself, my sort of qualifier is, I know it's weird. And I know I'm kind of weird because I like to talk about this stuff. But when you have that experience, you'll find not a lot of people like to talk about it. And when you do find that person who wants to talk about it, it's really a blessing. And it's a relief to be able to say all the things that are rattling around in your head that you can't share with your family or your friends or your kids. When people do get it, I get that, oh, I need you, or I have a friend who blah, blah, blah. So the people who don't get it, I know they're not my client. They haven't had that experience yet, or they've moved through it in a meaningful way, and they're on the other side of those emotions and feelings that make them feel blocked.
You were saying about at this point, so it's people that they've lost someone and they're getting stuck. Are you seeing any patterns there? Is like a wide range of things people are getting stuck on, or are there some specific things that you see coming up again and again?
A lot of anger and resentment towards the aftermath of what happened after their person died, whether it's family drama or the aftermath of a crummy relationship or an unfulfilling relationship. Or, my brother died and my parents haven't spoken to him in 5 years, and I feel all alone in my grief, because they have their own guilt and stuff, and they don't ever want to talk about him. That kind of stuff. It can be very isolating for people.
So what you're saying there is it's a lot of the areas people are getting stuck. It's around issues that they have with people that they're left with afterwards, and because they're the people they have the issues with, they're the people they can't talk to about it.
And I help them either find a way to address those issues with the surviving members of their family or friends or whatever, or to manage it within themselves so they can go on and have a different relationship with, their parents, for example. Because a lot of times you can't make someone change. We all know that. You can only change yourself, but if someone is, for example, really angry that they left a mess, sometimes people get so stuck in that anger that they can't move on and find the beauty in the relationship that they did have. You know what I mean?
They're stuck with as you said, the aftermath of it rather than the complete thing.
That's exactly what I dealt with my mother. Was Keith, my mom, died very abruptly when I was 22. She died of a big heart attack, and she was an alcoholic. So she left a mess. And there was no funeral. My stepdad was completely incapacitated and had no idea how to deal with her death or me or anything. So it took me a good long while to untangle all that stuff.
I'm curious about grieving, actually, because grieving was something I believe was a cultural norm. You were dressing in black, you had to take some days off, and it was something which was a ritual. And today it seems like grieving doesn't exist anymore. It's not there, it's something you have to deal with. That's it, it's just like, okay, somebody dies, okay.
Get over it.
Get over it and move on. Why are you wasting time? I don't know how. Is it one day that we get from the company, if we are lucky, or not even that? So, what is grieving, first of all? To me, it's maybe it's important to get to this high level, stuff, and why it's necessary for us to grieve.
That's interesting. There's the Kubler-Ross model of the 5 stages, which actually that research and that book was written about dying. It was written for the dying person.
Okay.
It has been adopted to be a grief model. The thing that I don't like about it is it sets this idea that grief is linear and that you're supposed to go through these stages and all that kind of stuff. Whereas we all know it's really a plate of spaghetti, and it takes a long time to untangle.
I like that analogy. That's good. Yeah.
There's a guy named John Warden who set up the 4 tasks of grieving, and it was sort of in response to the 5 stages. And I like it a little bit better, and again, this is where the English language in particular fails miserably, because we don't have a lot of words around this. But basically, the first task is to acknowledge the death. And, denial is such a weird word, because people will say, I can't believe they're gone. Well, of course they know. It's just, accepting it in your heart, this huge event, and really getting used to the idea. And then the second task is to work through the grief, right? And that's the big, what does that look like? It's different for so many people, and as you guys said, it's not really socially acceptable, particularly in this age where we're digesting information so quickly and we're expected to process information so quickly. Matters of the heart are not quick, and matters of a broken heart are even less so. So the time that it takes for people, and then if they have multiple events, somebody dies, then you get into a car accident, then you get laid off. So now you've got all this compounded stuff going on, and the initial grief just makes everything worse, right? Or if your dad dies and then your dog dies, oh my gosh, now all of a sudden the death of the dog is way bigger, because it takes time, right? The third task is to adjust to an environment without your person.
Okay.
That takes time, depending on who it is, right? If it's a spouse, that's much bigger than a parent. So my dad died 7 years ago from brain cancer, and that was when I really realized that this is a great topic for me, because his death versus my mom's death is world's difference in acceptance within my heart before it happened. Anyway, my stepmom said that having your spouse die is really, really, really hard, because they are part of your daily life. I mean, your parents, they're your childhood, so much of that dies along with them, and the stories and all that kind of stuff. But your spouse is everyday person. Depending on what your relationship is with the person who died, that's the third step. And then the fourth task, the fourth task is to create a meaningful way to carry them with you as you move forward in your life. That's really where coaching comes in, because people feel a lot of guilt and worry about moving on. If I sell the house, I'm going to lose my attachment to my person. If I leave the state, if I change jobs, if I, all of those things that happen after your person has died, you feel more and more like they're further and further away. So how do you create a lasting thing that you can take them with you, whether it's a photo album or write a book, or, it's different for every person. So that's
a different way of honoring the memory and holding on to that without it being a barrier to you moving forward.
Absolutely. So, and John Warden, the guy, he wrote a book about it. He even struggles with the language, because one of the things that I've learned is that people completely reject the word heal, right? You don't heal from grief. There's a healing, I think, that occurs, as time goes on and as you work through it and all that kind of stuff, but you're never healed. I like the word integration. You integrate the grief, and you integrate the experience, and you have to reintegrate your life, because we are still here, and our person who is no longer here always wants us to move forward, and they want the best for us, right? So how do you do that in a way that feels good and isn't riddled with guilt? Well, Dad wanted me to go to college, so now it becomes like this mission. I have to do this, or whatever the thing is. So, how to do that in a way that feels good to you, and that you're not just living out something because it was your loved one's, wish for you.
Are there many regrets people have to work through? And I think in terms of what Olivier and I are doing with this project, and around the whole subject of death is what can we learn from all of these experiences around death that can help us to live better now, and maybe get to that point where we're not carrying all that stuff around afterwards. What kind of things are coming up for you with the people that you're meeting on in your work?
A lot of getting over the shoulda, coulda, woulda. I should have this, I could have that, what if I had. Somebody called it the what if hiccups the other day, which I thought was great, right? Well, what if blah, 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 over and over and over again. So that's a lot. And a lot of anger over things that were not tidied up. There's a lot of talk about, making sure that your affairs are in order and that your stuff is in place, because, as we all know, we like to think that we have a good long life in front of us.
Yep.
But that's not a guarantee, right? So have you guys seen the website GYST? It stands for Get Your Shit Together. It's a lady whose husband died and left a gigantic mess for her to untangle. It's a blog and a resource for getting your shit together, with all of your paperwork and all of the stuff that your family would need, if you were to unexpectedly kick the bucket, as it were. People who have to deal with that stuff, there's a lot of anger and resentment that I work with, and a lot of just wishing they had more, right? More time, more connection, more, just more, whatever that is. And I think the medical community has really hooked into that, because their job is to create more, right? Their job is to create more time. So, and sometimes that works out beautifully, and a lot of times it doesn't. And then there's the whole, being dragged through the medical mud if somebody has a life-threatening disease. Nobody ever talks about permission to say enough, or I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore. That's another big thing, that just that either the medical community failed them, or that they wish that maybe their person had not done as much as they did, or that they had done more. So there's so much stuff. There's so much involved depending on what the situation is. My mother-in-law right now has cancer, and she's coming home today. She had a stem cell transplant. And she and I have talked a little bit about when she doesn't want to do it anymore, to just let us know, and we'll make sure that happens. When the treatment no longer feels beneficial. You know, I wanted to make sure that she understood that we support her because it's her life and it's her death. You know, it's her process, and we will support whatever she wants to do, regardless of what the doctors say, because they can be very pushy. And that was a weird conversation, but it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful, and I hope she appreciated it. You know, it's tricky because people are, you know, it's a really tender subject.
How about you, actually? Because you have this death conversation, basically, or, you know, this grief, you know, how does it impact you in your daily life? Have you seen yourself changing along the ways from the time that you had these death encounters, you know, this here replacing the cemeteries, to now? What's the difference for you?
Oh, huge. Huge difference. The main piece is that I am no longer shocked when people die. Sad, surprised, but not shocked. You know, 2016 was the year of the celebrity death, right?
Yeah.
Seemed like every week somebody was dying. And people would talk about how shocked they were and how they couldn't believe it and all of those things. And I thought, well, yeah, it's sad and it's tragic, and, you know, and a lot of the deaths were, you know, felt like they were too young and all that kind of stuff. But some of the people who were quite old and, you know, or like David Bowie, right? He had cancer. This was not a revelation. You know, he was quite open about it in his private way. You know, his final record was such a beautiful testament to dying. You know, and when he died, of course, people were really, really, really sad, but shocked. I just, that didn't resonate with me at all. And so it's hard for me to not be judgmental. It's like, well, wait a second, we are all going to die. So why is this a shock? You know, surprise, yeah. But the timing of it, maybe. But I got the sense that people don't expect people to die. And I think that's a disservice to life.
I think the shock, I guess, you know, maybe it's is it like to confront your own mortality suddenly, just to see, well, shit is dying. So, because we don't talk about death, you know, that's, I think, the entire thing. And this is why we are here, you know, trying to talk about that. It's maybe not to have this shock anymore and to try to do something about this life.
Yeah, that, you know, that could very well be that it is, you know, if David Bowie died, then I'm going to die. But if David Bowie Keith Richards is outliving everybody and nobody expects
somehow.
Maybe there's hope to outlive people too.
It flies in the face of the whole good living theory, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think you're onto something there, that it really does make us glance in the mirror in a different way. And a lot of people don't want to look in that mirror. You know, well, I think most people don't. I think you're absolutely right.
Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.